All right, this video is super important for your understanding of market failure because in this video, we are going to set up a base diagram for all of the externality diagrams that are going to come, right? There are 4 of them: negative of consumption, negative of production, positive consumption, positive of production. But all of them start in the same place. Now you're going to start drawing this thing, and this is when you can get like just twisted up. And I would say in my teachings of IB economics here in Santiago, Chile, the diagrams that I mess up most are these, because while they are distinct, you can just, as you go through it, if you don't learn a proper process, you can get really confused. Okay, so let's take a look at this diagram that I have here, right? And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because you know what this is. What is this? This is the rule of 11, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the title is 11, okay? So that's the rule of 11. This is the base microeconomic diagram, and I told you way, way, way back in demand, supply, and market equilibrium, this thing's never going to go away, and it's not, okay? But as you just saw, because we're doing efficiency analysis or allocative efficiency analysis, it's helpful just to change the name of the supply curve and the demand curve, because we're actually going to have to separate them out. Because what happens in market failure is what's best for society is not necessarily best for the private person who's consuming the cigarette or for the company who's polluting the air. Okay, so if I could just shift your thinking one little more step, right? You take this diagram and then we rename it and turn it into something called the base diagram for market failure. Base means like the fundamental diagram for market failure. This is the diagram that you will begin with in every single market failure externality diagram that you're going to get, okay? Remember back when we were doing government intervention? Yeah, and I said like, okay, rule of 11, and then one thing's going to happen. Boom, it's the tax. Boom, it's a subsidy. Boom, it's a ceiling. Boom, it's a floor. Yeah, same concept, except the diagram's a little bit different, okay? And what I want to point out to you sort of right here is that if you look at this point right here, right, you will see that it says marginal social cost equals marginal private cost. And down here in green, it says marginal social benefit equals the marginal private benefit. Okay. When we begin the story of market failure, we start off with a socially optimal point, right? Point B. And then something's going to happen. And I'm going to give you a little tip here, because anything that has to do with consumption is going to affect which curve? Well, consumption is the demand curve, okay? So for anything that's a negative externality of consumption or a positive externality of consumption, the marginal social benefit curve is going to shift. And what you'll find out is there's actually another curve there as well. So the reason that market failures exist is that the social benefits no longer equal the marginal private benefits. The social, that's the S, no longer equal the marginal private benefit. And as a result, you get a different outcome on the graph. And what's best to think about in this base diagram that we are going to use over and over and over again as we go through these externalities is there's actually 2 lines here on top of one another, right? The marginal social benefit curve is here, and underneath it is the marginal private benefit curve. And anytime we're talking about an externality as a result of consumption, whether good or bad, that's going to affect the demand curve. Okay? It's not the demand curve. It's going to affect this curve. The old demand curve. But don't put demand curve on a test. You'll get marked wrong on it, okay? So that's consumption. Not shockingly, what does this curve represent? Well, this is the old supply curve, and this represents production, right? Because producers produce things and suppliers supply things, and therefore, of the 4 externalities, anything that has to do with production, whether good or bad for an external party, it's gonna affect this curve, which is the old supply curve. So I want you to think about, right here, there are actually 2 lines, right? On top is the marginal social cost curve, and underneath it is the marginal private cost curve. Okay? This diagram right here, this diagram right here, this diagram right here is the beginning of every market failure story. One event's going to happen. There's going to be pollution. There's going to be someone smoking a cigarette. There's going to be the consumption, like you are right now, of education, or there's going to be the production of healthcare. And whatever that happens, this is where the story begins. So in any question that you get in market failure, all you have to do is draw that diagram, the base market failure diagram, and then look to see what curve shifts. If it is consumption, it will be the old demand curve. One of those lines will shift. If it is production, negative or positive, it will be the old supply curve. One of those two lines will shift. One of them will stay put, and one of them will shift. Okay? Okay? Last little thing. Last little thing. Last little thing. Last little thing. You see that point B? That point B will always be where the marginal social cost curve intersects the marginal social benefit curve. Okay? Now, as we build these diagrams, it's going to get confusing, but that's the socially optimal point, where marginal social cost equals marginal social benefit. That is where the point B will be, and we will always work to return to this optimal output level, which is right here. Okay? Do you hear that? This point B means that this quantity of whatever good we're talking about, product X, is what is optimal, that output level. And that output level will always be where the marginal social cost curve intersects the marginal social benefit curve, regardless of whatever else happens on the diagram. Okay? Excellent. If you didn't understand this, start over, because you cannot go on in market failure without learning this diagram. Okay? Excellent, excellent. If you got it, we're rolling. On to the externalities.